Hello and welcome to the British Council ELTons Festival of Innovation 2024. My name is Chia Chong and we've been coming to you live since 6 a.m. UK time this morning. It is now 5 p.m. for me UK time. Now, some of you have been here watching lots of sessions with us at the ELTons Festival of Innovation. I recognize some wonderful names in the chat field. We have Alicja, Avalos, welcome back. I see you in every session. But I am curious, how many of you are watching a ELTons Festival session for the first time today? How many of you are newbies and have no clue what the ELTons are? The ELTons used to be a traditional festival, a traditional awards ceremony held in London to celebrate those that push innovation in the world of English language teaching, those that try and help solve problems and deal with the current issues of our world with their innovations. This year, the ELTons, after 20 years of traditional ceremonies, decided to take a whole new format, moving away from the ceremony to something much more accessible and relevant to get to reach a wider audience around the world like yourselves, educators, learners, parents, policymakers, education managers, and so on. I'm very, very happy today to be chairing your session, Mastering Meaningful Conversations. Why is authentic speaking practice so important, and can AI help? And with me, I have some very, very esteemed finalists who have been nominated for the ELTons Awards. So let me first introduce the speakers. We have Attridge. Anne's career in teaching and research was shaped by the desire to find new ways of learning. She is now the CEO of Click to Learn, an online learning platform with not just one, but two projects among the ELTons finalists this year. She's got the Digital Learning Hub nominated in the category of Excellence in Course Innovation, and also Destination OET and Beyond, nominated in the category of Innovation in Learner Resources. Welcome, Anne Attridge. We also have Talley Caruso. Talley authored Digital ESL, which is a course teaching beginner English learners digital skills, digital literacy via smartphone experimentation. Previously, she's led people-centered tech transformations at Fortune 500 companies. And today, she's joining us as a finalist with her innovation, Digital Literacy ESL, nominated in the category of Innovation in Learner Resources. We also have Richard Chinn. Richard is a teacher educator working between King's College London and International House London. His research interests are in classroom interaction, very apt with his expertise in today's topic, and teacher development. And Richard joins us as a finalist with his book, Working with Emergent Language, which he co-authored with Denny Norrington Davis, nominated in the category of Innovation in Teacher Resources. Last but not least, we have Alicja Jankowiak, editor-in-chief and enthusiast of implementing innovative language learning methods with the use of modern technology, dedicated to integrating AI into learning resources meaningfully. Today, Alicja is joining us with her innovation, RPG Dialogues in Super Memo Chat. And this is nominated in the category of Innovation in the Use of Technology. So before I continue, good luck to all our finalists here today. I hope you win tomorrow. And today we're here to talk a bit about real-life conversations and AI. Before I continue, I would like to remind everyone this session is interactive. We want lots of engagement. We want all of you to have your say. So do use the chat box. Just remember that some of you are writing to hosts and panelists. You might want to click on the little blue box with the little arrow at the bottom of your chat box and change that to everyone. And that will enable everyone to see your thoughts, your opinions, and your questions. More specifically, if you don't want us to miss out on your questions, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A box. Type your question in the Q&A box and we will make sure that our moderator does not miss out on it. So without further ado, let's welcome our four finalists to talk about a bit about authentic real-life speaking practice and how AI can help. Now, as you notice, this topic comes in two parts. So we've got the authentic real-life practice, and then we've got artificial intelligence. And some of you might be wondering, how do these two connect? Can they connect? So let's first talk about authentic real life practice. To some of us, it might seem obvious to learn to speak English, you need to speak English. But for some of us, it might not be so obvious. So let's start by talking about the benefits of real life speaking practice. Um, I would like to point towards Richard and Talley. Would you like to tell us a bit about the key points about why authentic real life speaking practice is so important in language learning?
Gosh, maybe I'll start and Tally, you can add to this. Well, for me, I mean, I've been a language teacher for 20 years, and most of my work is teacher training these days. However, I spent hundreds of hours, like yourself, Chia, in the language classroom, and it really is about getting people to communicate. When people learn a language, generally you want to learn to speak a language, not write a language or read a language, and it's about communication. So I suppose we've got to ask ourselves the question: what's the purpose of language? And if you look in a dictionary, like the OED, it's going to tell you something like it's a system for communicating thoughts and feelings about the world. So it's quite, it's about this idea of real communication. We're using it as a tool to interact with people. So for me and my students that I've worked with in the language classroom, it's very much centered around that. And certainly working in the context that I have done in the, using a communicative approach, it's been really important to have class.
A really meaningful discussion as opposed to a formulaic control practice. So
Yeah, well, I
let's
think
just imagine give us
Mm.
some concrete examples here, Richard. So let's imagine you're teaching. Okay, we love grammar, right, as teachers. So let's say we're teaching the past simple. How would meaningful practice look like as opposed to perhaps something more contrived?
I think there's a danger, isn't the language teacher? People have been learning languages forever, so there's not one right way to do it. But certainly in the classes that I've taught, putting a focus on real communication, by real, I mean genuine interaction where people are listening and responding meaningfully is important. If that's not to say that you can't focus on teaching the present perfect, the past simple, or grammar items. But as you say, it's about how do we operationalize that, making that meaningful. It could be made meaningful by personalizing it to the learners, by getting the learners to be creative, using their higher order thinking skills to engage with language as well. I think that's how we make it meaningful, rather than it just being, staying at the lower order end of things where, students are simply just understanding and remembering facts, as opposed to actually really doing something with the language. And as we know about language, things like grammar, for example, it's a process. So as teachers, what we need to do is to create situations in the classroom where those processes can be practiced. That's if we're viewing language as a skill, which in my context, we very much do.
Mm-hmm. So what tips would you give teachers in terms of trying to implement that authentic interaction in the classroom? And also to the viewers out there in the chat box, how do you get your learners communicating with each other in a more authentic, meaningful way? Not just, communicating to practice a grammar point, but to actually saying something meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Should I throw that over to you, Tally? So I've been talking quite a lot.
Yeah, no worries. So I actually have another question for the folks in the chat. So how many of you know another language besides English? And also, have you ever taught anybody kind of common phrases or how to pronounce things, special dishes and things from the country? So I just wanted to think about that because I think that sometimes comes up in the language classroom and it might feel like it's authentic, but then you're kind of just spitting out things that are expected. Oh, well, in the US, we eat hot dogs and hamburgers and we like apple pie, but it's such a flat representation of our culture. So I think when we think about authentic practice and it's authentic speaking, it really has to do with coming up with things that really have to do with our personal selves and not expecting people to represent a whole country or a whole people, but instead kind of getting down to those deeper conversations that really provide that human connection, that are beyond what you would see in a book, beyond what you'd be able to kind of grasp from a piece of paper, and really allow us to be able to get interested in learning about one another, which is really what communication is about.
I'm just going to pause for a moment, and really, I know I sound like a dog with a bone, but really dive into the definition of authentic speaking interaction, because I've noticed from the chat field when I ask the question, how do you get students communicating meaningfully? We've got at least 4 answers here that all say role plays. are role plays what you are thinking of? Are role plays what you have in mind? Or is there something much more basic that's just about, like you say, a human connection? Could you give us some concrete examples so that our viewers can understand what we mean?
I think there's a couple of things, aren't there? I mean, getting students to talk about themselves. People do generally like talking about themselves. That's one way we can do it, by getting them to talk about things that they're interested in. I think as teachers, what we need to do to facilitate that happening is to ask them really genuine questions. In language classrooms, very often teachers ask very closed questions. If we're doing grammar, for example, what's the past of go? Who knows the answer to this? The teacher knows the answer to this. So this isn't an authentic, it's not a genuine question. So I think, we can facilitate the process by, creating meaningful interaction in class by asking real questions, open questions that the teacher doesn't know the answer to. What did you do at the weekend? The teacher shouldn't know the answer to this. So this will generate real discussion in the first place. You said people put up things like role play. Sometimes our students, and I've had classes, I'm sure we all have, where the students don't say much and they go very quiet and they don't want to reveal things about themselves. What did you do at the weekend? I went to the park. Did you have fun? Yes. And it's closed. So maybe we need to engineer a way to get people talking more. And one of the ways we can do that is maybe creating a meaningful role play based around some language maybe we've been looking at that day, or something that the students are interested in. So that, or kind of creative activities where we might get students to perform a task, like in task-based learning, something that they might encounter in real life. So I think those are ways that we can actually make things more meaningful in the classroom, rather than closing things down with the kind of questions that we ask about, when we're testing, superficial knowledge about language forms. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Maria Lemos here also mentions task-based learning, and Tanya Garcia, content-based lessons. And we've got some people here talking about perhaps asking questions. Rachel Head says, ask questions which don't have the right answer. So getting students to really genuinely, authentically communicating their opinions, their points of view about something that's real to them. Absolutely. Now, Richard, you are nominated for the ELTons for the book about emergent language. I don't know if everyone understands the term emergent language. And how does that relate to authentic interactions? Could you tell us a bit more?
Sure, absolutely. Well, my interest is in what students say to each other, how teachers interact with students. So Danny and I wrote the book Working with Emergent Language, and it's about providing teachers with ideas and activities for developing how they react to learners in class. Because as I mentioned before, if we only just respond to, let's say, grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation errors of what we're teaching, then we're not really responding meaningfully to what the learners are saying. Now, as you know yourself, I know myself as a learner of Spanish. When I speak and I'm trying to communicate an idea, when I'm trying to make meaning and make my meaning understood, there's going to be forms that I use that are not appropriate or accurate to get my meaning across. That's when there's an opportunity to work with language that the learner really needs. So in class, what I'm often doing is getting the learners to speak, listening to them. And then when there's a gap in their knowledge, for example, they say something incorrectly when they're trying to express meaning, or perhaps I can show them to say something in a more complex way to push them on developmentally. All the students might ask me, teacher, how do I say this in English? This is emergent language. It's language that arises in the lesson when meaning is at the forefront. And it's through that interaction, through that conversation, through the trying to work things out and get meaning across, that this language arises. And then the teacher can step in as the more knowledgeable other and work to help the learners at the edge of what they know. So you're providing the learners with new language. But just one thing to add, it's not solely about, doing target language work. So let's say we're teaching the present perfect that day. That's not emergent language, that's target language. Emergent language is the language that I didn't plan to teach. It's the language I'm giving the learners in response to what they're trying to say, what they're trying to do with language in the classroom. And that happens with all of us when anybody's learning a language and you're interacting. There are always those moments where you'll notice something. You think, oh, why are people using that? Or you won't understand something. You'll say, what does that mean? Or can you slow down? Can you say that? So this is all emergent language. It's a natural part of the process of learning a language. So it's fascinating to me that nobody, apart from Luke Meddings and Scott Thornbury and a few other people, have actually talked about this in in the literature on language teaching because it's a normal part of learning a language. So our book, Working with Emergent Language, focuses on techniques that teachers can use to work with learner language, to show what it can look like in class, but also to provide support for teachers in how to deal with this, because it can be quite scary for teachers, especially new teachers, working with emergent language, because they can't plan their response. You've got to think on your feet. And as you said at the beginning, you've got to improvise. So it's about how do we develop our improvisational skills as teachers when we're working with what the learners really need, which is at the edge of what they know. And that's only revealed to us through meaningful interaction and communication when the learners are producing language. And that gives us the raw data to work with, to give them feedback and to help them with their language development. It's not the only part of language teaching, but it's certainly an important part. As you can tell, I'm very excited about it. In our research.
I'm very excited about it too. I think two things that come very apparent to what you're saying that's really exciting me is that, you know, we've been saying for a long time, language knowledge does not equal language usage, right? So we know all this language that we've memorized for tests and spellings and whatnot, right? Grammar, structures. But then when we open our mouths to speak in a meaningful, authentic way, it doesn't necessarily come up. And what then emerges, what then comes up, it might be slightly different. So the second thing I wanted to say is that, you know, what the wonderful thing about emergent language is it not just brings about superficial language use, it also highlights other ways of using language. Very often we don't necessarily say what we mean. Our styles of communication might be influenced by culture. There might be socio-emotional skills involved, like active listening skills, the ability to empathize, the strategic competence of being able to say something when we don't have a word for it. And all that comes up in an authentic conversation. Talley, I want to go to you for a second. Do you deal with emergent language in your lessons?
Oh my gosh, all the time. Actually, I was just thinking of a time where, I teach ESL in the mornings to this population that's mostly stay-at-home moms. And I had this one person who had said, teacher, can you explain to me cap? And so luckily I had a water bottle near me and I was like, oh, like cap like this? It's like, no. And then I picked up like a baseball hat. I went, cap like this? It's like, no. I was like, can you give me an example? So she gave me an example, and what we landed on was the fact that it was slang. And I was like, I'm too old to know this. So let me go, let me go online. I went to urbandictionary.com, which is a very popular site in the US to be able to look up slang. And I said, hey, let's look this up together. And so that was emergent language that I was not expecting at all in the classroom. And I said, hey, I'm not going to know a lot of this. And for slang, I'm absolutely not the right person for what younger people are saying right now. This was someone with a kid that was like 8 or 9 years old. And so I was like, you know what? Here's a website that you can use if you're ever curious about this, right? This is something that many of us use when we're not really in the know about lingo. And it's very useful so that you at least know what's going on in a superficial way, even if you're not necessarily using it. But that was something that was really neat. And another example, we were coming up with cookbooks. So in terms of practicing language, project-based learning, each of us had come up with recipes, in the classroom. And for people that didn't want to write a recipe, they had to write directions on how to be able to order certain meals from a local restaurant. Right. So either way, we're practicing language and there's choice for people to have to practice that language. Well, during that time, we were talking about some similar foods that were actually across multiple countries, which was really interesting because, in a recipe, you need to be able to know the names of the ingredients. So, we've got people searching and I allow people and even encourage people to use their smartphones to look things up and kind of share with each other so we can get through the emergent language that's like, it's we landed on it was yogurt. Right. So we didn't necessarily know, but through pictures and also kind of sharing recipes and understanding what these ingredients were used for, it really allowed us to actually build community within the classroom. Because if you were forced to only use English and you couldn't find what the word was in English, the communication would be over. Right. So it was really important for us to be able to use digital tools, for us to be able to use translanguaging in terms of being able to pull from our full linguistic repertoire. So for example, I've got several people in the classroom that speak Arabic. If some people are more proficient in English, they can help be that kind of like liaison into sharing one person or a couple people's knowledge into the full classroom.
Then
So all these things is amazing.
That imitates what happens in real life, doesn't it? It's
Exactly.
people, you know, helping each other to understand. We have a term, negotiation of meaning, and that's kind of what happens when two people, especially two people who speak English as a second or foreign language, come together. They're negotiating meaning. They're trying their best to understand each other. And that is something that happens when you put two learners together to do some real life speaking practice. And that can be quite hard to imitate. Now, we've been talking a lot about the benefits of real life speaking practice. In the chat field, if you can think of any more benefits of getting students that authentic, real life, one-to-one or group speaking practice, please do type it in the chat field. But I'm going to go on to, because with every good thing, there's always a flip side. Are there any challenges? Are there any disadvantages to prioritizing real life speaking practice to such an extent?
I think
everyone feel free to come in. Yeah.
So just one thing to kick this off. You know, sometimes I talk to my students about this. I teach on MAT Sol at King's College, and you know, sometimes they say, well, we don't have the time to do lots of speaking in class. They've got to learn all of this grammar, and they've got to be able to read this text and answer questions on it in order to pass the exam. So I think, you know, the sort of negative washback of exams is that some teachers feel that actually I don't have time to do the speaking. And, you know, also my students don't feel very confident doing it. Some teachers would say, you know, actually, you know, it's not my strongest thing either. So I think these are some of the things I come across. I don't know about anybody else in your context.
I think you're right, and especially if the exam tests, you know, multiple choice understanding of language items and linguistic competence like vocabulary, grammar, then there's definitely that danger of not prioritizing real life speaking practice. Talley, I'm just going to come back to you for a second, because your innovation talks a bit about how we can use technology, and that seems to be your expertise as well, technology to access authentic conversations, because for some learners, accessibility is an issue. Right. I mean, I live in the UK and I've taught in London and York, where classrooms are multicultural and multilingual, so students can practice with each other. People don't, because it's not a monolingual class, people don't go back to their own home language. There are opportunities for intercultural real life speaking practice, but for some people that might not be so easy. And for some people learning English, they don't even have a class to go to. How does that work? How can you help them?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is before I became an ESL teacher, I was a casual language learner of Portuguese. So everything that I did to rise from beginner to upper intermediate was all enabled by technology. So whether it's using Google Translate, to studying on Duolingo, and then finding people to chat through HelloTalk. And then eventually I actually founded my very own virtual exchange group on WhatsApp. That allowed me to be able to actually select people from around the world that were working with each other to teach and to learn English and Portuguese. So what that was almost like a little experiment if you think about it. These are people that you wouldn't necessarily run into in your neighborhood. There's people that were getting their an indoor pool being set up in their very fancy Sao Paulo apartment. And then there's people who had hardly any connection that were able to kind of get, you know, interact through WhatsApp through kind of just the chat feature. So you would record audios, you would send texts, you would send stickers, memes, things like that. If you didn't have a lot of bandwidth, you didn't necessarily need to go, you know, full into like a Zoom call and worry about an unstable connection. You know, a lot of people might not necessarily have the means to be able to travel to be able to, you know, be in full immersion. But in a way, if you think about the way that we interact with one another, with our friends, our family, maybe even coworkers, you know, many of us use WhatsApp naturally as an app to communicate. And so this was kind of like embedded. Instead of having to hop over to another app and start learning, you're basically just jumping into your group chat and kind of sharing stuff about your day, you know, recording audios and getting some feedback from your friends to be able to learn in a very authentic way, and a way that was really meaningful because you're connecting with other people. You know, it wasn't something that you were required to show up at a certain time. In the chat, if anybody wants to, tell us about how you feel about asynchronous learning. I think for some people it like makes them cringe, or it makes them like, squirm a little bit, because, during the pandemic, a lot of us had to quickly go online and start figuring out how to learn and how to teach, in this dynamic way. But what had made Osteticadus, the WhatsApp group that I created, really interesting was that it was asynchronous, right? People could chat and study when they could. People could go back and listen to audio recordings and practice their pronunciation or see how far they've come. And they didn't necessarily have that time boundary because it was always there. So, you could, if you were, an insomniac and you were up all night, you could participate in there. You can scroll through and see what you missed. If you were in a different time zone, we were in all sorts of different time zones because we had people from all across the US, all across Brazil, even Ireland and Mozambique. Like, we had people all different time zones, but we're all able to interact in ways that made us feel connected, because, even people that didn't necessarily have the confidence to necessarily actively participate in a speaking way, they'd be observing the chat, and they would come to me periodically and they'd say, hey, I really, really appreciate you keeping me here in this group because it's still helping my English. Even though I'm not like saying anything, I feel like listening to these conversations and seeing people chat and seeing the video links and resources and all this other stuff that we're sharing with each other were super, super helpful. And, it allowed us to be able to kind of tap in when we were interested and put it down if we're too busy.
Thank you. Talley, I like that you mentioned learner confidence as well, because one of the things that I hear some teachers say is, oh, I'm sure speaking practice is great and all that, pair work, group work, but my learners don't have the confidence. You mentioned learner confidence, right? The confidence to speak. And I don't want to put them in pairs because I'll just have a silent classroom. And learner anxiety, the fear of showing yourself up, the fear of making mistakes can definitely inhibit such a lesson, and I think this is a really good time to bring Alicja on, because I think, Alicja, in Super Memo, you deal with a lot of simulated speaking practice, right? And I think traditionally when we talk about technology and asynchronous learning, I mean, like, how do you have a real life conversation with someone when you are not like live with them, chatting to them, face to face? Like, how can that be possible to learn a language? And in a way, in the early days of language learning apps, that was the case. We've gone back to flashcards and vocabulary definitions and fill in the gap grammar exercises and like, what happened to the communicative approach, right? But it seems that AI is making that possible. We are able to now incorporate speaking practice in a meaningful way. Alicja, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, sure. So Talley and Richard and also you, Chia, you mentioned so many aspects of what I would like to say, what I would like to talk about. That I hope I will be able to respond to all of it. But yeah, it's a huge subject. I actually come from the context of asynchronous learning. So whatever Talley and Richard mentioned about learning, it doesn't really apply to my context. In my context, we deal with self-learners who look for solutions to learn on their own. They don't have this person of a teacher. They don't have a group of other students that they can learn together with. They are mostly on their own, and they have to find a solution that will adapt or respond to whatever they are looking for, to the level, to the topics that they want to learn, to the aspects of language. So whether it's vocabulary, grammar, or speaking. And as you said, Chia, it has been a huge challenge for applications for self-learners, because they would typically focus on aspects that do not require active communication. So be it writing or be it speaking. So with AI, what we've finally been able to do is offer speaking practice, and it's really amazing because it's been our dream for many years, and now it looks like it's possible, and also the benefit of AI today is that it's widely available. It's not like when you look at the situation 5 or maybe 7, 8 years ago, it's not like AI occurred like from yesterday, right? It's been a process, but it hasn't been a process that was available for everyone. And I'm not thinking about individual students, but also I'm thinking about companies like ours. So those solutions were reserved for a very limited group of recipients, and we couldn't even play with it. We couldn't discover the possibilities that AI could bring us. Right now, today, like for it's been 2 years that this technology has been widely available, and it's amazing because finally we could develop a solution where you can learn on your own and you can practice meaningful, open communication via dialogues that will not only focus on the form, but they will focus on the meaning. They will focus on what you have to say. They will give you missions, like objectives that you have to achieve. They will also help you build strategies, how to deal with such situations later on in real life.
So we're talking about, to say, for example, so I've looked at your innovation super memo. So we're talking about a situation, for example, you're sitting on a plane next to someone and you don't know this person, but you want to be friends with them. You want to have a little, relationship building chat. So you turn to them and they turn to you and they say, hey, what movie are you watching on the plane? And you are really actually chatting to AI, but you're simulating that situation that you're on a plane and you're building relationships with someone and you're typing your response. Am I right to say that? You're typing your response as if speaking.
You can type it, but the real benefit of it is that you actually say it. So you can you can operate it with your voice because this technology, it actually brings together AI solutions. They bring together different applications, different options. So you can use speech to text. So whatever you say is converted to text and then understood by AI. You can use text to speech. So actually, whatever AI understands from your spoken language is transformed, is converted to audio. And there are also translations, there are also corrections. The focus is not really on the form, so the corrections will not like overwhelm you, but if you are interested in the form, they are there. What AI also offers, and I think it's been a topic today that I've heard it a lot in the previous panels, is that AI also can give you feedback, like the importance of feedback when you speak and when you practice speaking. So
I just want to give an example of that feedback, Alicja, because I'm very excited about this. So I was trying out Super Memo, and the task I was given was I was a secretary to a boss, and the boss wants me to arrange a meeting between him and a client, and I had to like book a room and get the snacks and all that. So I was being a bit cheeky. I said to the AI bot, I said, who is this client? Like, why are we booking a meeting room for this client? Thinking I was going to trip the AI up. And as I had the conversation with the AI and I kept asking who's the client, the feedback I got was so positive at the end. Instead of feeding back on my linguistic ability, it started to pick up on the fact that I was interested in the client, and it says, "Oh, it's really good that you're showing interest in the client, and that is important in your job." And so I like how it picked up on the content. I'm just going to go very, very quickly. I'll come back to you, Alicja, but I'm just going to go quickly to Anne, because Alicia's been telling us how Super Memo does simulated speaking practice, and you've got 2 finalist innovations in the ELTons this year. How have you interpreted or used AI in your innovations?
Thank you very much. Yes, well, I'm picking up on a lot on what's already been said around the area of authenticity, around the area of meaningful conversation, and particularly feedback, right? So, I mean, just to put this in context, the one I'm talking about at the moment is our 3D simulations, and they are very much related to a very specific type of learner. That is someone who requires a very proficient level of English in order to work as a doctor or a nurse anywhere in the world. And so to some extent, we had a very discrete audience to aim for here. And we knew exactly what they needed to be able to achieve with communication skills in relation to actually quite high grade and professional exams that they have to take. This is even going beyond the preparation for an English exam. It's going into the realm of general medical counsel and that kind of thing. And one of the most challenging things that any professional has to face in this situation is when you're dealing quite literally with life and death situations, you're dealing with very awkward conversations, you're dealing with emotional issues. And that was a very big aim for us, to be able to monitor and somehow give feedback on how well someone is communicating in a situation where, if they're not empathetic, not showing a sort of compassionate and reassuring presence to the listener, then that's going to be even more difficult for them to take on board what you're saying. And so what we tried to do was basically create a serious game. So we create a situation where we have avatars who they have to respond to. We have prompts that they have to initiate a conversation on. And we had to go outside our own sphere of expertise here. And we worked with the NHS to, if you like, script a conversation so that we knew it was authentic. We knew this was exactly the kind of situation that you might face, if you like, on a busy Friday night in an accident and emergency department in a hospital. You've got somebody coming in drunk who doesn't want to let the doctor do any procedures. I mean, these are real situations where you've got to break bad news with test results. You've got to discuss end-of-life care with a relative for an elderly person. All these kind of very stressful but very real communication situations. And of course, a lot of what we do is around the vocational space. So we are trying to prepare people for real workplace scenarios. There's a lot of the learners we deal with in the UK are refugees, and they are looking for work. Some of them are very highly skilled, some of them aren't. But it's that preparation for the communicative aspects of the real world in a workplace situation that we were trying to tackle here.
Thank you so much. And we have a comment from our audience member, Ross Wright. Now, I know Ross because she is a materials writer for quite a lot of medical professionals. And she says you can't get more authentic than this. And I think coming from Ross, that is absolute high praise. So thank you, Ross. There are some questions, I think, and some comments from the audience, a lot of them expressing surprise at how AI can help speaking. A lot of people know about ChatGPT and how AI can help write essays and help with writing. And I'm really pleased we're doing this session because we're looking at a completely different use of AI here, using AI to deal with speaking. And I think a lot of people are quite surprised by that. There is a question about accents. How sensitive is AI in terms of students' accents? Can AI, are they biased towards certain, like, regional accents or so-called first language speaker, native speaker accents, or can they be trained to understand different accents? How do you deal with it, Anne?
There are always reservations around that. I mean, we have been working now particularly with audio and the AI capacity to give insights into what is happening and to give feedback that is useful for the student. It continues to evolve, right? I think even the preparation for pronunciation, that it sometimes will pick up something quite ridiculous that you haven't said if you're talking about speech-to-text recognition technology. that may just require you to try again and to be more clear and more articulate in what you're saying. And that's no bad thing, you know, because inevitably, certainly in a medical situation, there will be many different nationalities that will be communicating with each other, and it is that sort of finding that common point where you can be intelligible. We're not looking for perfection, we're just looking for intelligibility here. So I think that's one thing that it can do. I think what it could also do is give insights, and this has surprised people when they've tried our technology out, into their fluency. You're not aware, and I'm not aware at the moment, of how much I'm pausing, how much I'm repeating myself, what fillers I'm using, and how that is coming across to the list. That's the thing that machine learning can actually do very well. But it's not necessarily it's not the full picture, but it is an aspect of being able to analyze how you've performed in a situation. We, of course, we're focusing much more here on the emotive element, and that I'm not saying we've absolutely not cracked that one. We haven't. There are some emotions that are very easy to measure with machine learning. They tend to be more emphatic and more extreme, if you like. Something that's softer, like empathy, is more challenging. But we're continuing to work on it, and we continue to give students, even thinking about it, not just what they say, but how they say it. That kind of approach, I think, is becoming more common in medical training, but hasn't often been concentrated on up until now.
That is absolutely wonderful. So you're admitting that machine learning has still a long way to go in
Yes.
measuring speech signals, understanding intonation, understanding how to be empathetic, or how empathetic someone is in their voice, for example. But that is still to come. There's still a lot more development to be had there. The other thing that you mentioned, which I absolutely love, is the acknowledgement, because we have two people in the question answer box asking about accents here. We've got Eric asking about pronunciation, and, you know, this bias towards our benchmark of what good pronunciation means. And in a wonderful way, the machine is kind of an objective, I want to say person, but the machine's not a person, an objective figure in assessing intelligibility rather than being swayed by their biases of accents that they're used to, but they can be trained to be focusing on intelligibility, which is extremely useful in an age where English is the lingua franca for global usage. Absolutely wonderful. Which brings us on to those challenges. You mentioned the limitations of machine learning. There's another challenge here mentioned by Dr. Rainier El-Shatter. How about ethical issues? Should we have some control over student age groups who use AI to practice speaking? Any thoughts on that from anyone on the panel?
Well, I think that there are obviously GDPR issues here as well. As soon as you start collecting more information about people, you have to be super careful about, you know, what you're doing with it and what permissions you have from them. And we have to, for instance, get permission from people, even though we're going to anonymize their audio files that we collect. We have to make sure that they're happy with that, because we can use that to further train our approach to giving people feedback. But I mean, just to touch on some of the issues around limitations, we did a lot of work recently on trying to get precise measurements of what was causing pronunciation difficulties, intelligibility difficulties when pronouncing individual words. Now the machine's very good at doing aspects of that, very good indeed, and you can see, you know, from a spectrogram, you know, what's going on with somebody's speech. What then happens is you've got the interference, if you like, from the microphone, from the device that someone's actually using, how good it is and what is actually picking up. And then even more important than that, you've got the problem of trying to reconcile that data with the human ear. You know, because we hear things differently. You know, our brains are maybe hardwired to pick up certain sounds and not to pick up other sounds. And so the whole issue of human perception of what is said is not something that machines can really do terribly well at the moment. So that there's still a lot of development work to do around analysing and feeding back on speech.
That's absolutely amazing. I know Richard and Talley, you have been sitting there probably dying to respond to something because Richard and Talley, your innovations are very much about, face-to-face interactions. And here we have this concept of the machine being able to do that. How do you feel about that? And where do you think we can go with this?
I mean, personally, I think it's fascinating, that there's so much in the future that we're going to see in terms of developments with AI. I mean, I think, when we initially had a discussion about this as a group, the thing that came up is, back to I think what Anne was saying in terms of what the AI can actually perceive. And I think actually in terms of its meaning building as a process, it's not doing that the way the human mind does, because AI is curating information that it's being fed. Whereas the human mind has got that much more, creative element to it. Well, that's what we do, is to create in order to get meaning across. And I suppose my question is, or throwing it open to Alicja and Anne, who obviously know a lot more about this than me, the sensitivity doesn't seem to be there. Some of the work that you've done recently in your professional life, Chia, is on things like mediation. And this is a big thing in the world at the moment in terms of how we communicate with each other. And I'm just wondering, at the moment, it doesn't seem, any of the AI I've tried doesn't seem to have that real nuanced sensitivity to respond and feedback was mentioned as well. And I just wonder, my big thing is watching teachers teach, and that sensitivity to be able to respond appropriately. I think, I wonder about that. That's my big question about AI and where we are at the moment.
And I'm going to add to that. I'm going to add to Richard's question and throw it over to Alicja and Anne. To add to that, a lot of the AI role plays at the moment are very, information sharing, right? Like at a restaurant, at a doctor's office, at a train station, asking for directions. So very, very predictable scripts. But how do we deal with much more sort of people building, relationship building, interpersonal stuff, which kind of relates to one of the questions here. What can the AI begin a conversation when someone is stuck and don't know what to say? That awkwardness of real life conversations. You don't have to have an answer, but where do you think we might head with this, Alicja or Anne?
Well, I think Anne said something that really resonates with me, that we at least well, I'm speaking for myself, but we do not aim at perfection, and also we have to understand that the context that we've built is quite simple. It's to serve learners of languages at different levels, but to give them like the first step of or whatever we've been able to create for now, for today. And well, the technology is so new that I cannot really even tell you what's going to happen next month, next year. It's growing exponentially. So of course, yeah, my dream would be to offer such dialogues where that would be, first of all, maybe endless, right? Or touch upon things that are not so maybe down to earth, like those conversations that you mentioned. But for now, this is what we have, and it's really exciting to see which way it's going to go. So I think it's for all of us to see. And that's also the beauty of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is very exciting to finally actually move away from just translation activities.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing, because there was this question about what happens if you get stuck, right? If can AI really help you? So we've added a little help in that case, and AI gives you suggestions. So if you are stuck in a conversation and you don't really know what to say because the level of the conversation is too high, or you lack vocabulary, you can use those suggestions. So there are ways to keep the conversation going in a way.
Yeah, and also just to kind of touch on Claudia's comment here as well, when you are in that situation, stuck and feeling a bit awkward, or like in Anne's situation where she's talking about a doctor, training a doctor to do, bedside manner, right? Dealing with people who are grieving. It is wonderful to have that opportunity to first practice with an AI.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we get rid of the real authentic people conversations, but I think having that chance to rehearse it with
Yeah.
AI and
Have a
then
testing ground. Yeah.
testing ground and
Exactly.
then do it with a real person.
Mhm.
That would be amazing combination of both, wouldn't it? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's a very, very good point. I think it touches on the point that was made earlier by some of the speakers about language confidence, language learner confidence, and I think what we can provide, with this type of approach is to give people that endless level of practice, right? Every time they say it's a little bit different, the feedback is a little bit different, and they can see how close they're getting to perhaps where they want to be. It's encouraging reflection.
And I think it's great because you've got basically a tireless partner. I imagine, people in Hollywood, right? That they're like, oh, who can I talk to rehearse my lines, right? Like I can't imagine that everybody is as tireless as any AI tool. So like having a partner basically to be able to build your confidence so that when you get to the point where maybe you do get stuck, you're stuck less often, right? You have more of the baseline figured out. So I think, AI kind of supplementing real life speaking is really important because you're trying to get rid of the roadblocks. You're trying to improve the confidence. So maybe AI can't help you with, should I give the person a hug, right? Like that might not necessarily, like there's the things that you only learn culturally, right? And, that's something that you might be better to learn through people than necessarily through AI in a lot of cases.
Well,
And
AI
there's
would
also,
probably be able to troll the internet and find the recommended answer for that question. What AI still can't do is actually give you the hug.
That's true. And I would say the other thing is that, it's a very, depending on the tools, right? So if we're talking about, specifically talking about end of life, discussions or very like delicate situations, you're getting very narrow practice. And perhaps the person that is studying English in that way kind of gets tired of it and they want to be able to have something else kind of bolster the rest of the language they're looking for. So I think that's maybe one of the shortcomings, but it's not really that big of a shortcoming because that's not what the tool that was built was specifically for, right? It's just in general, if you're to zoom out about English language learning, the authentic practice with humans would allow you to be able to have basically any communication that would be deemed necessary between people. And then the last thing that I was thinking was, a lot of times what I do, because I work in the ESL context, so most of the people that are in my room are from other countries, already have an established knowledge in their native language or languages. And so one thing I always like to bring up is the fact that the majority of people that use and speak English are speaking English with people that are non-native speakers of English. And so that is such a huge thing because, perhaps from an AI training model, you do need to kind of perfect the way that you're speaking because you're trying to deliver that higher level of service. You're trying to kind of match a certain expectation that allows for clear communication. But in the ESL context, at least here, you're going to have to negotiate for understanding across multiple people. You don't get to choose who helps you, right? And you don't, and in order to make connections, you need to be able to figure out, how to ask an appropriate way for someone to repeat something and to be patient and to, all these different things that are more soft skills that happen in the classroom among people that isn't necessarily replicated currently so much in AI because AI has to be trained in a certain way and it would
You're
be
absolutely
kind of
right.
complex.
It's
Perhaps in the future.
the soft skills. I think it's supposed to like with the hug, the AI can give you the theory about the soft skills, and it was just another thing to actually be able to respond using those soft skills. Due to time, unfortunately, we won't be able to continue much of the discussion, but I do want to address, there are a couple of questions here, not so much related to meaningful, authentic conversation, but whether there is a feature, City Sarah asks, where teachers can buy a course and then, that involves AI and then they can monitor students' progress. And then there's another question from Koichi Duran about using AI to check, or rather check how much students use AI to make their products. I am not ignoring your questions, but these are more connected to other users of AI, not about speaking practice, but other users of AI in our industry. And I urge you to look at the recordings of previous sessions at the ELTons today that we have been talking about AI. There are several sessions about AI throughout the day today. Also, I urge you to go to the ELTons Festival page to have a look at the finalists. There are quite a lot of finalists, especially in the category of technology and innovation, use of technology and innovation, like Anne and Alicya's innovations that make use of AI. There are lots of wonderful examples of how AI can help reduce teacher stress and the amount of time they spend by analyzing students' progress, analyzing students' data for them. But because that's not about authentic speaking, we haven't really addressed that today, so I apologize for that. Now, any last comments? I'm going to go whip round. A last comment from Richard.
I think just from me, a big thank you to inviting me along to this. And it's really fascinating to hear what everyone else is doing in their own context. And I think, we will see how we're going to be using AI much more in what we do in class. And I think the exciting thing for us as teachers and teacher educators is to see how we'll be using those tools to support learning that happens in the classes that we're teaching.
Absolutely. And AI is not just ChatGPT. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Talley?
So I would say, being proficient in a language often seems out of reach for some people, but it doesn't need to be that way. So whether we leverage existing technology or build new technologies to connect people, one thing's super clear is that digital skills are a huge enabler to language learning and can break down barriers across socioeconomic, age, cultural differences, and foster a sense of community and inclusion.
Thank you. And Alicja?
Yeah, I think because here we have a group of teachers and AI practitioners, so I would like the audience to leave this session without this feeling that we contradict each other, because it's actually, I think we want to move in the same direction, but using different options, different possibilities. So it's all about the same objective, but using different tools, whatever we have around, whatever we have on hand. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to maybe next year having the same conversation. What's going to be different in AI? What new things will come up? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. After all, innovation is about using new ideas to solve the problems we have. And Anne?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much has been said that there's a wonderful eye opener into the world that are now open to us with AI, which has not been before. And I think, scalability, accessibility, democratization of learning, all of these things are now much more within our reach than they have ever been. But at the same time, we have to be the evaluator. We have to be still the moderator. We have to still, I think, not the Wild West develop on its own. There is a danger, I think, in assuming that AI is going to solve all our problems. It's not. It can do some fantastic work for us, but I think we still have to be aware of its limitations and counter them.
And that's a really, really good point. AI is not solving all our problems. We still have a job. Thank you so much to our speakers and to our online audience. In a minute, if you're an online audience, you will get a pop-up survey. So please do take 2 minutes to share your thoughts about the session. It will really help us plan for future events. Up next, one last session to go for the ELTons Festival. Do head back to the festival platform for our last session. Never Stop Innovating. Sorry, 2 more sessions. Never Stop Innovating, which is a watch party, and then a session on how to maximize online professional development for teachers, aside from attending sessions like this, of course. Thank you very much for being here today. And with that, I'd like to thank our speakers, Anne Attridge, Alicja Jankowiak, Richard Chinn, and Talley Caruso. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you, all audience.